This lesson's a continuation of multiplying fractions because dividing and multiplying are very similar. We're going to start at the bottom of the page where the rules are here to talk about what we're going to use to get the answers. That way it should make a little more sense. So just like before multiplying fractions, we're going to change any mixed numbers into improper fractions before we start. We don't divide fractions. We're going to change the division to multiplication. And when we do that, we need to take the reciprocal of the fraction after the symbol we just changed. So we take that fraction after the sign of multiplication and we flip it upside down. The reason we do that is because multiplication and division are opposite operations, so we take the opposite of that fraction afterwards, and that makes the equivalent still. We then multiply the numerators and denominators straight across. We simplify if possible, and just be careful of the signs of the fractions. Remember, we're using the rules for integers, keeping that in mind. So pause it if you need to now to finish copying that down. I'm going to go back up top and start the questions. So question number 8 is already fractions. We're not going to change that. We leave the first fraction alone, 6/7. We change that to multiplication, and we flip this fraction around, so now it's 7/1. We can reduce these fractions before we multiply to make it easier to simplify later. So we look diagonal and up and down. Is there anything that they share in common? It's a 7. So I'm going to reduce these by 7, and I get a 1/1. So when I multiply across, I get 6/1, which is 6. If I didn't reduce those, I would have got 42/7, which also is 6. The 5 I'm going to write as 5/1, so it's a fraction. Change that to multiplication, and I flip the fraction after it to 15/7. In this case, I can't reduce it all, so I multiply across. 75/7, and I change that into a mixed number. 7 goes into 7 once, 7 goes into 5/0, and I have 5/7 left over. So 10 and 5/7. Number 10, I leave the first fraction alone, -4/6, change it to multiplication, and I flip the fraction after it to 24/10. This I can reduce. The 6 and the 24 are diagonal to each other, so I can take a 6 out of each of those. That makes it a 1 on the bottom, and on top, 24 divided by 6 is 4. The 4 and the 10 up and down I can reduce. They each have a 2 in common, so this will be a 2 and a 5. And I get to the point where now I can't reduce anymore. I multiply across, so I have a -4 times 2. That's -8/5. And I turn that into a mixed number, -1 3/5. So there's a lot of steps involved. Just make sure you do each step carefully. Number 11, I leave the 3/4 alone. Change it to multiplication. And before I do that, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up 1 second. I'm going to leave this division and turn this into an improper fraction first. So I multiply the bottom. 2 times 5 is 10. Add the 1 is 11/2. And now I'm going to rewrite it. I don't want to do too many steps at once and get confused. So that's why I backed up and left it. Now I'm going to change it to multiplication and flip the fraction now to 2/11. I can reduce the 2 and the 4 diagonally by 2. So that's a 2 and a 1. And I multiply across and get 3/22. And that is reduced as far as it can go. Number 12, I change them into improper fractions first. So that's 15/2 divided by -17/6. Leave the first fraction alone, change it to multiplication, and I flip this fraction around to 6/17. I can reduce the 2 and the 6 by 2. I'm multiplying now. I have a positive fraction and a negative fraction. Positive times a negative is a negative. And I multiply across and get 45/17. And I'm going to go down here now so I don't crowd that. So I turn into an improper, or a mixed number, sorry. -2 and 11/17. is what it would become. 13, I changed it into improper fractions. So 9 times 3 is 27, and 4 is negative 31 over 9, divided by negative 7 over 3. Leave the first fraction, change it to multiplication, flip the second one. So it's 3 over 7. I can reduce the 3 and the 9. Nothing else will reduce, but now I'm multiplying two negatives, so that makes a positive. 31 over 21, which is 1 and 10/21. So just keep in mind the rules that we've been using. Mrs. Lau rolls out 2 3/4 feet of dough to make noodles. If the noodles are 3/8 of an inch wide, how many noodles will she make? Well, you notice this is kind of a trick question. We're talking about feet over here and inches over here. So I want to make sure the labels match each other. So 2 3/4 feet, I want to turn into inches. And there's 12 inches in a foot. So I write this 2 3/4 as an improper fraction, 11/4 times 12 inches in a foot. And I can reduce. So 2 3/4 feet is 33 inches. Now I'm going to use this in the problem because now the labels are the same. So I have 33 inches of dough, and each one is 3/8 inches wide. So I'm going to take 33 inches and divide it by 3/8, and that will tell me how many of these noodles I can make. So I leave the first fraction alone, put it over 1. Change it to multiplication and flip this to the reciprocal. 8 over 3. I can reduce the 3 and the 33. And I multiply across and get 88 over 1, which is 88 noodles can be made. If you have any questions, make sure that you ask during class. We'll be happy to go over it.